So Congressman Stewart, thank you so much for speaking with Voice of America.
We're happy to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity.
The 2016 election, presidential election results surprised many. In your view, why do you think Mr. Trump won the election against expectations?
Well, a lot of people are asking that question, aren't they? Because it did surprise a lot of people. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to just this. The American people were hungry for change. And they looked at Secretary of State Clinton, and they looked at Mr. Trump, and I think they just decided he's a complete outsider. I think, for the first time in our history, we had someone who'd never held elected office. And I think the American people looked at that and said, that's a beautiful thing.
You are a member of the House Appropriations and Intelligence Committees. In your view, what should be the foreign policy priorities for President-elect Trump and the Republican Congress?
Yeah, that is such a great question because we have so many challenges. And you start with, in China and the South China Sea. You go to the Middle East, obviously, something that we've spent so much blood and treasure and so much of our time and attention over the last, 10 or 15 years. Vladimir Putin in Russia. I was in Russia and Latvia and Poland and other nations where, some of the people in the Baltics are looking at Russia and saying, are we the next Ukraine? Is it possible that he would come in and penetrate our borders as well? Look at the Omans in Iran, and will they honor the agreement they had to not develop nuclear programs? So all of those things, but I think the most important thing, or at least the thing that the president should do first, and that's to go to our allies. In my travels in Congress, on the Intelligence Committee particularly, I go to many of our friends and allies, but I have many of them say to us, where's the United States? We don't know if we can count on you any longer. Will you honor the agreements and the treaties that we have put in place? And I think the next president is going to have to focus on our allies first and go around and assure them that the United States isn't going to withdraw our influence in the world. The United States isn't going to recognize that we have a special responsibility to lead. We may not like that. As Americans, we may not seek that responsibility. But the truth is that if we don't lead, then someone else will. And they may not lead the world in a direction that's going to benefit people. So I hope that's what Mr. Trump does. I hope it's one of the first things he does is to reach out to our allies and assure them that we're going to play a positive role in our future.
During the campaign, Mr. Trump has repeatedly criticized China, especially China's trade practices. First, how do you evaluate U.S.-China relations under the Obama administration? And is there anything you'd like to see change for President Trump?
Well, when you ask how do I evaluate him under the last administration, I was in China in the last 6 months or so, and I had a very, very good visit there. And we were treated very well, very respectfully, and we had great conversations. But on the other hand, I look at some of China's, their activities in the South China Sea, and I'm troubled by it. I see them, intimidate, perhaps even bully some of their neighbors. These are small countries that couldn't possibly stand up to China without, feeling like the U.S. would back them up. And I'm troubled by that. So, I view China as, the reality is they are a growing and emerging power. There's no question about it. They're already a very, very powerful nation. They have a very bright future. What we have to do is find a way where two powers like the United States and China can coexist and coexist peacefully, recognizing that they have certain core interests, we have certain core interests. How can we work together to protect those? And I think the next president, again, is going to have a challenge to do that. But I certainly hope that he will, and I expect that he will.
President-elect Trump on Friday received a call from Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen and has caused quite a stir. It has broken decades of U.S. diplomatic practice.
Yeah.
How do you see this controversial phone call?
Well, it's kind of funny to me because as a military guy, it seems to me it was overblown. I think our media certainly made it into a bigger deal than most Americans viewed it. And I think probably the same thing happened in China. I think they viewed it as a bigger deal than perhaps others. And I'll let the diplomats and the ambassadors kind of work through the protocols and the etiquette of those kinds of things. And once again, I would say China is an emerging power. They're a very powerful nation. We want to be a partner with them. On the other hand, by treaty, we have obligations to protect Taiwan, and we want to protect Taiwan. So it's a fine balance there, I understand. It's delicate, I understand. My reaction to the phone call is probably our press overreacted to it. I think even Chinese officials kind of downplayed it. They're like, it's maybe not as big as some people thought it was going to be. And, it probably shouldn't be.
Going forward, do you see any room, specifically areas where U.S.-China can cooperate?
Oh, certainly. Here's an easy one, the war against terror. China, as I was out in Uruchi and some of the western provinces, and they have some of the same concerns that we do, as do some other nations. We can work together on the war against terror. We can work together as we try to lift nations out of poverty. China has enormous influence in Africa, for example. In my travels to Africa, it's interesting to go to an airport or to a seaport and see China working there and helping to develop infrastructure for those nations that are very poor. And that's a great example of where we could work together as well. And finally, there's trade. Both nations benefit when we have free trade between us and strong trade alliances. So I think there's far more that we can work together than there is, potential that we have conflict. But once again, there are core interests that both nations have. We need to find ways to protect those core interests, and at the same time allow the nations to, have a friendly relationship like we've had over the last, 30-something years.
Domestically, what are the domestic priorities for the Republican Congress?
Oh, there's so much. There's so much. And for the first time, I've only been in Congress for 4 years, and I've been so frustrated. And for the first time now, I'm excited to come to work because we are going to have a chance to actually fix some things. I mean, in a meaningful way, fix some things. For example, tax reform, which would impact our relationship with China. Have meaningful corporate tax reform, regulatory reform, to actually make it so that American businesses don't feel like government's trying to make life harder for them. I was a small business owner, and I felt many times, government is just making it much, much more difficult than it has to be just to run a small company. And then the last thing is we have to look at our defense posture. When I was in the military, we had about 156 fighter squadrons. We have about 55 now. Many of us feel like we got to address that. We can't keep going down this path where we've taken money away from our military. Many of us feel like we have to recapitalize our military, and I think that will be one of our top priorities as well.
You are, besides that you were a congressman, you were in the Air Force, and you're also an author. But I also understand that you hold the world's fastest nonstop flight record. Can you tell us what that's like?
Oh, flying was so much more fun than being in politics. I'll tell you that. I'd be up flying, and I'd go, I can't believe they pay me to do this. It was so much fun. But you're right. I have the world's record for the fastest nonstop flight around the world. It's in the B-1. Which is this, amazing aircraft. We'd carry 84 500-pound bombs, and we could fly, obviously, great distances and do it very fast. And so, we didn't set out to set the world speed record. I have to tell you, if we'd gone to the military and said, hey, let's go set the world speed record for around the world, we don't do that. That's not the purpose of the United States military. But we were flying these long-distance missions anyway, and here from the United States to the Middle East, where we'd practice a mission there and come back home. And as we're getting ready for those missions, I thought, we're about a third of the way around the world. Why don't we just keep going one time? And that kind of started it.
So lastly, is there any message that you would like to send to our Voice of America audience in China?
Well, once again, having visited China and having developed relationships there, both while I was in China as well as with people we visited with here, we respect the Chinese people. We respect the Chinese government. We want to find ways that we can work together. We have some concerns, as I've expressed them. I think China's behavior in the South China Sea, for example, is very troubling to me. And I'm not the only one who feels that way. But I think we can work through those issues if we are committed to a long-term partnership. I think that we are. I know that I am, and I know that other government leaders are, and we look forward to having, positive outcomes because of that partnership.
Thank you so much, Congressman Stewart, for your time.